This station, KATH 910 AM. Needing dental treatment and not understanding your options is very stressful. So if you or one of your family members is in need of care, but you're unsure where to go, you can find me at midcitiesdental.com, or you can call me at 817-282-9321.
Theology on Tap is back. Mary Immaculate Catholic Church in Farmers Branch is hosting the next Theology on Tap Thursday, April 22nd from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. in the Mary Immaculate School Parish Hall. Come hear University of Dallas professor Dr. Christopher Malloy address one of the most challenging magisterial teachings to come from the Vatican. There is no salvation outside the church. Free beer and snacks provided. For more information and to register, visit the Mary Immaculate Church Facebook page.
Hello, my name is Bill Mertz. My wife Liz and I own MasterTech Auto Repair in Plano. We're proud sponsors of Catholic Radio. Our family has been parishioners of St. Gabriel's and McKinney for many years. MasterTech is a full-service auto repair. From oil changes to complete engine replacement, our transmission service. We're located just across the street from St. Mark's Parish in Plano. You can contact us at 972-578-1841 or www.mastertechplano.com. Thank you, and may you have a blessed day.
Hi, I'm John Cavana, a first-year pre-theologian from the Diocese of Dallas, discerning my vocation at Holy Trinity Seminary. This Lent, my seminarian brothers and I invite you to pray the Way of the Cross with us virtually, each Friday at 3 p.m. on facebook.com/HT Seminary, where you'll also find a link to a devotional aid so you can follow along. Please join us as we meditate on our Lord's Passion.
Hi, my name is Jake, and my brother Gerald and I are simply real estate investors and sponsors of KATH 910 AM. Our team, along with partners, specialize in helping you and your neighbors in distressed situations by buying distressed homes. In doing so, we enjoy revitalizing the neighborhoods and giving back to the community. The number to call is 682-317-9330, or you can simply visit us at 911myhouse.com.
Thanks for listening to KATH 910 AM, Frisco, Dallas, Fort Worth. Catholic radio for your soul on the Guadalupe Radio Network in North Texas. Heard also at grnonline.com and on your smartphone. Transmitting the treasures of our Catholic faith to your radio every day. This is the Guadalupe Radio Network. Radio for your soul. Welcome to Back to the Father, a show about the journey of life focused on our final end, which is God Himself, our loving Father. And now, here's your host, Dave Palmer.
And welcome to this week's edition of Back to the Father here on the Guadalupe Radio Network. We're glad you're with us, and more people are starting to hear about this show. It's all about the Summa Theologia. I take that back. It's not about the Summa Theologia. It's about God, our origin, and also our end, and how this exciting adventure of life is a journey back to the Father. And we use the Summa Theologia, St. Thomas Aquinas' teachings, to get us there as a little blueprint for a good life, all right? And I became fascinated with the Summa Theologia many years ago, read it, studied it, taught it, and through the grace of God, here we are on 37 radio stations talking about the Summa Theologia. So welcome. We love your comments. We love when you go on our social media platforms and comment or call us up, 877-757-9424. My name is Dave Palmer, host of this program. And with me, they come for the hat, they stay for the Summa, as we say. And I'll tell you, if you are not on your social media platform right now, you are missing out.
Are they?
I don't know what to say about that hat, Sissel. Remember last week we talked about lying?
Yes.
And it's like, do you like it? I don't know what to say. It's how would you describe that?
I would describe it as a exercise in humility for me.
Okay.
First off, second of all, I think it's kind of Queen Elizabeth II, which is very on theme for this week, right?
She's been in the news.
She's been in the news.
Week,
So that was all it was. It's one of those hats that I've had in my closet, and it's more of a costume hat. It didn't age well.
Now you said it, not me.
It did not age well. I
Okay.
can say that because I own the hat. It makes my head look about 2 times taller than it is.
All right.
But, you know.
Yeah, but
It'll catch people's
anyways,
attention.
Sissel vowed to wear a different hat for like between now and summer, and then she's going to have to start recycling. She warned that she's got a couple more just like that, but good to have you with us. And Sissel's role is basically, you know, she's a co-host. She's also a student. I don't even share with her before the show what we're going to talk about because the first segment we do a lesson. And then the second segment, we open up the phone lines and we get comments off of social media, which brings me up to introducing Diane Xavier. She's producing the show, running the board, and also sets up all of our social media with the help of Jonathan, our intern, high school intern. So if you want to go to Facebook or YouTube or Twitter and watch what's going on behind the scenes and see Sissel's hat and all that kind of fun stuff, please do. The handle is at GRN Online, okay? And speaking of Jonathan von Weber Hansberg. He spoke the first time. Generally, he's behind the scenes. He's kind of, getting everything going and does a great job with it. Relieves me a lot of things that I would otherwise have to do. I mentioned last week he's kind of a master of accents, and one of his accents is an Irish accent.
Which is kind of timely.
So I thought, if we're ever going to bring out Jonathan's Irish accent, wouldn't it be the show before St. Patrick's Day? Because St. Patrick's Day is next Wednesday.
It is.
All right, so this is pretty bold. I don't think I would have done this as a high school student, going on network radio.
You're not
okay?
making him feel any better, Dave.
So Jonathan told me that he has been learning about St. Thomas's writing style and helping him to be a better student. So in his best Irish, he's going to explain that. So Jonathan, first of all, welcome. Thanks so much for your help with the show.
Oh, it's great stuff, I tell you.
Okay. And so what did you mean by that? That you're actually a better writer because you're imitating Thomas's style? I don't even exactly know what that means.
Well, I wouldn't say that I'm a better writer at this point, but I've been reading more of Aquinas and a bit of De Montfort as well, and I've been thinking, I might as well start sort of trying to mimic how they write and how they say things and how they present their arguments when I'm writing my own papers there. Now, the first time I started doing that, actually, I started getting far better grades on the old papers there, and I have to say it's been rather nice.
I didn't hear a thing he said.
I know.
I was too busy listening to the accent.
I know. All right, say it. Okay, that's a really. My wife is Irish. I'll let her decide whether that was a good Irish accent or not. But say it in English. It was in
Remember,
English.
she can't lie.
In American. But seriously, you've been learning about Thomas's. You can bring on your regular voice
good,
now.
yeah.
But that was very good, though.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
But
So what do you mean by that?
just sort of like his structure, kind of in a way, how he'll present his argument, and then he'll be like, oh well, a critic may object, I mean, just sort of if you read, I try to make my papers look like Thomas was writing about the Scarlet Letter, basically.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Oh, okay.
And then I started getting better grades instantly. So
There
I'm pretty
was
happy with
a religious sister who did the argument about whether people should wear masks or not, and she did it in the form of an article of the Summa. Have you seen that?
No.
And I read it, and it was so good. And I know that's something that sometimes students of Thomas will be asked to do is, pick a topic, right? You ask the question, and in writing like Aquinas, it forces you to see the other side, and it forces you to explain the other side that you don't agree with. And oftentimes, Thomas could explain the other side better than the other side could explain their side. And so anyways, great job, Jonathan. Love the accent. And so, again, I welcome everybody. And please, in the second segment and the third segment, we want to hear from you. 877-757-9424. Got some great calls last week, didn't we?
We did. Some excellent calls. Very good questions. And, got to hear that people listen to us regularly, which is really nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the reasons I originally decided to pick up the Summa and start studying it was that I was listening to Catholic radio in the early days of working at Catholic radio, and it seemed like hosts were constantly talking about the Summa Theologia, constantly talking about Aquinas, and I thought, this was written like 700 years ago, and it still seems to be the gold standard for so much as far as the moral life and learning about God and learning about the angels and human nature. So I just couldn't stop. I couldn't help myself from going to the bookstore and getting it. Well, it's still happening. The show the other day, David L. Gray's program, he had a Thomist on, right? And I'll tell you what else. I was listening to Catholic Drive Time this morning, okay? Early in the morning. I do it every morning. Joe and Adrian and Emily. And they got this kind of inside joke going on with Catholic Drive Time. It airs from 6 to 8 o'clock Central Time every Monday through Friday, where Emily and Adrian are big-time Thomists. And they're trying to move Joe in the direction of Thomism, right? And Joe seems to be kind of resisting it a little bit. And so this morning, Joe gets into this explanation about the intellect, and he was talking about, passing a hamburger shop and how he's, got to resist, and Adrian couldn't help but realize that Joe is kind of becoming a Thomist before our very eyes and our very ears. And so here's how the conversation went after Joe talked about the intellect.
When did Joe become a Thomist? I'm just wondering.
A Dominican?
I didn't want to say it out loud. Good grief, we could have gotten away with. In fact, I tell you what, call in to Dave Palmer's show today, 4 o'clock Central Time Zone. He only talks about St. Thomas Aquinas, but I double dog dare you, dear audience, to call him and quote Franciscan theologians today. Just randomly quote Franciscan theologian.
I don't think most people can even name a Franciscan theologian. Franciscan theologians are not exactly as popular as Dominican ones.
Bonaventure?
Yeah, right?
Yeah, that's about it.
Okay. Besides
SCOTUS.
Okay.
Was he Franciscan?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure.
The list is pretty narrow.
Yeah, it's not a huge list. I mean, there's a lot. I can list a few, but not that are popular like Thomist. You have like popular Thomists like Ed Fazer, Kevin Voss.
All right, there it is. That's what went down in Catholic Drive Time this morning. And so it's interesting, though, because back in the Middle Ages, as they were kind of alluding to, there was this, I don't know if I'd say conflict, but there was kind of an intellectual competition between the Franciscans and the Dominicans.
Oh, interesting.
And, it came down with like the dogma of the Immaculate Conception, where actually it was a Franciscan, Duns Scotus, who Adrian mentioned, who got it right. And Thomas, in some ways, in the Summa, didn't get that one right. So I've had a little bit of time to think about it. They were doing it off the top of their head, but Bonaventure was definitely a Franciscan.
I like how Emily bailed Joe out with that one.
John Duns Scotus, he came up with a formula for the Immaculate Conception. He was a Franciscan. William of Ockham, a little problematic. He was a nominalist. In fact, I'd love to talk about nominalism sometime in this show. And when you get to the Dominicans, I should say the Thomists, of course, Aquinas, Edward Fazer, who Adrian mentioned, Reginald Garrigou-Lagrange, you ever heard him?
No.
Famous Thomist, Etienne Gilson, Edith Stein, even though she's a doctor of the church, even though she was a Carmelite, you can be a Carmelite and still have a Thomistic, slant to you. Ralph McInerney, Mortimer Adler, Bishop Barron considers himself a Thomist. And so Thomism is everywhere. And I think the Franciscans are more known for animals. And, Francis is a very popular saint, of course. But it also shows that in the Catholic Church, you have these various charisms. And you got the Franciscan charism, the Dominicans, the Augustinian, which kind of went a little bit kind of Platonic. Augustine was a great Platonist. You've got the Jesuit charism, the Cistercian, the Carmelite. And I think that it's awesome because every order kind of takes a little bit of a direction. They're not, heretical, but just different angles towards the same truth.
They're covering all the bases. Yeah. Well, think about it. All of us are unique individuals that God created, and so how we do things are going to be slightly different, and so it's really beautiful. It's like if a single person became a religious sister or something, it'd be a bunch of different religious sisters, unique religious sisters.
Yeah, and if everybody was a Dominican, Adrian would have to close his ears when I say this, okay? It wouldn't be good if everybody was a Dominican, but no, we don't want everybody to be a Franciscan. We need them all, right?
No, you have to have them all.
All right, so I'm going to begin in a second my teaching segment of the show. We're going to be going over a particular element of the Summa Theologia. Today, we're talking about God's intellect and will. And in the tag on social media, I said, what does God think and what does God do? Okay, now you're giggling, and hopefully for the right reason, because God doesn't really think. And God doesn't really do things, because when you say, what did you do today? You're going to tell me all these things that the various actions. And, I cleaned my room and I drove down to the store. Okay, God doesn't do things in the sense, because that all implies change, right? We're always in this change. So it's hard for us to figure out what God does and what he thinks about, so to speak. But we're going to talk about that. And then in the second segment, Sissel's going to ask a few questions. Hopefully we'll get a few calls. And so if something sparks your interest that we're talking about here, give us a call, 877-757-9424. Wait until the second segment. And then in the third segment, why does it matter? Okay, why are we spending an hour of time on Catholic radio on 37 stations talking about the Summa Theologia? And I think I have some good things to explain why this matters. And by the way, Jonathan, my wife said that was a good West of Ireland brogue. And I don't know if she means West of Ireland, like off, but,
off the
like
X.
America. Well, America's west of Ireland. So anyways, I think she likes it. A Western brogue of Ireland. Okay, so in case you want to regionalize that, all right? Coming from a true Irish person. All right, well, let's get right into our lesson. And first of all, when we talk about God's intellect, all right, one of the questions that Thomas asks in the 14th question of Prima Pars, the first part of the Summa, is, does God comprehend himself? Now, I'll read a line from the Summa, and then I'll explain it a little bit. He says, God perfectly comprehends himself, and this can be proved. A thing is said to be comprehended when the end of the knowledge of it is attained, and this is accomplished when it is known as perfectly as it is knowable. Okay, so 2 + 2 is 4. We can comprehend that because we can know it as much as it is knowable. Okay, there's not a lot of nuances and complexities with that. But not only can we not comprehend God, here we'll never comprehend God. Even in heaven, we'll never comprehend God because God comprehends himself because he's God, right? And so I don't even know if we could comprehend our spouse or people. I mean, we're complicated, okay? I can't imagine saying, I totally comprehend my wife, or she totally comprehends me, all right? So comprehension means total understanding, but God does comprehend himself. All right, question 14, Article 8. Thomas says, is the knowledge of God the cause of things? All right, think about that. Is God's mere knowledge outside of time the cause of things happening? All right? I mentioned a little bit of this as we talked about truth last week. The truth originates in the person that creates it. So if somebody is going to do a painting and you want it interpreted, the truth of the painting came from the person who drew the painting, right? So imagine you're going to write a poem. Okay, so Sissel Anderson is going to sit down and write a poem. Okay, so she conceives of it in her mind. Well, it's already has been created. Okay, and then for the good of everybody else, because we're sensible creatures, she'll write it down. But it has already been created by her intellect, right? A book is already in the intellect of the author. Okay, so the best way to understand God is to understand our human condition and how we constantly are creating things. Okay, we're creating ideas. Well, no, we have ideas in our mind. We create things. They start in our intellect, and then because we're sensible creatures, we actually have to build them or paint the picture or what have you. And so that's a way of considering God's knowledge, okay? So Thomas says the knowledge of God is the cause of things. For the knowledge of God is to all creatures what the knowledge of the artificer is to things made by his art. Now, the knowledge of the artificer, and that's just an artist, is the cause of the things made by his art from the fact that the artificer works by his intellect. All right? That, to me, that's just fun to think about that. I mean, you think about something, you conceive it in your mind through your imagination, through your intellect, and then only we, because we're inside of time and we create things and we're sensible creatures, we have to show it. We have to have some kind of physical representation. But God isn't that way. God merely thinks, so to speak, of something, and it becomes created. Isn't that pretty cool? All right, so now we're going to go into God's will. And this is where we say, like, what does God want? Okay, will, the short definition of it is it's an intellectual desire. So when you say, what does God want? What is his desire? And Thomas asks, 19th question of the Prima Pars, Article 1, whether there is will in God. All right, is there will in God? Okay, do you think there's a will? Most people would say, yeah, of course there's a will, okay? Thomas says, there is will in God as there is intellect, since will follows upon intellect. Now, everything has an aptitude toward its natural form, that when it has it not, it tends toward it, and when it has it, it is at rest therein. And by the way, this applies, interestingly, to the theological virtues, because in order to desire something, which is related to hope, you first have to know it, which is related to faith. And then when you rest in it, that's related to love. And that's why Thomas says in heaven, you will have no need for faith, and you'll have no need for hope. You will only have charity, because you have realized that which you were having faith in and you were hoping for. And also, he says Jesus, as a human being, had no need for faith and no need for hope, because he was God. And so he already had the beatific vision in him. All right, a little bit of a sidestep there, okay? Going back to will in God. This aptitude to good things, this aptitude to good in things without knowledge is called natural appetite. Okay, he's talking about dogs and cats and squirrels and ants. Okay, they have a natural appetite. They just naturally want things. Okay, they want food, they want sleep. Whence also intellectual natures have a like aptitude as apprehended through its intelligible form, so as to rest therein when possessed, and when not possessed, to seek to possess it, both of which pertain to the will. Hence, in every intellectual being there is will, just as in every sensible being there is animal appetite. The interesting thing, by the way, about humans is that we are both intellectual and sensitive. We're like the animals in that we have a sensitive appetite. That's why we like hot fudge sundaes, and we like to sleep and drink and that kind of stuff. But we also have intellectual wills, unlike every other creature except for angels and God. God's not a creature. God, every other being, let's just say. All right, and so there must be will in God, since there is intellect in him, and as his intellect is his own existence, so is his will. All right? I put a picture up on social media of ants going towards watermelon. It's like you go on a picnic and you put a piece of watermelon down. You come back 30 minutes later and ants are all over it. That's an example of natural appetite. Okay? The ants don't really know what they're doing, but they are programmed to have a natural appetite, and they want to chow down on some watermelon. Okay? So we see this kind of stuff every day. All right. Drive around in the freeway. Everybody's going somewhere. Everybody's exercising their will. And that's why it's interesting. Do you know how many species of creatures there are on the earth? I'll leave that to the third segment because it's really interesting. And only one of them, as far as visible species of creatures on earth, has intellect and will. Imagine how privileged we are to be that close to God, unlike any other creature. All right, so then Thomas says, does God will things apart from himself? All right, so now we're thinking, okay, if God wills things apart from himself, and he's immutable, and he can never change, how does this jive with free will? God wills not only himself, but other things apart from himself. For natural things have a natural inclination not only towards their own proper good, to acquire it if not possessed, and if possessed, to rest therein. That's what we just talked about. But also to spread abroad their own good amongst others so far as possible. Hence we see that every agent, insofar as it is perfect and in act, produces its like. It pertains, therefore, to the nature of the will to communicate as far as possible to others the good possessed. And especially does this pertain to the divine will, from which all perfection is derived in some kind of likeness. Hence, if natural things, insofar as they are perfect, communicate their good to others, much more does it appertain to the divine will to communicate by likeness of its own good to others as much as possible. All right, so if somebody were to say to you, what does God want? I think the best answer, the quickest answer, would be he wants to communicate his goodness to his creatures. Okay, that's a very simple answer, and it's very nuanced, and there's a lot more you could say that, okay? So how does he do that? All right, well, let me first of all say, how do we do it? We have goodness. If you are a mother or a father or a grandmother, grandfather, you like to communicate your love to your grandchildren or your child. Okay, I have a picture up on social media of two parents kissing their baby, okay? We all know that. We want to communicate our goodness to our friends, right? We want to give of ourselves. It's built into us. This is an element of our will. All right, have you ever, new neighbor comes into the neighborhood, you bring cookies to their house? You ever, there's an elderly person in your neighborhood and you just feel this impulse that you want to help them? You want to rake leaves for somebody in your neighborhood? Where does that come from? Where does this impulse to do good, to spread your goodness? Okay, this is a likeness that we have with God. How does God spread his goodness? All right, you ever been to a zoo? You ever been fascinated with animals? You ever been fascinated with a sunset? You ever been fascinated with a child or a mountaintop? This is all God's goodness being communicated to us through the created world, okay? Let me see. Let me go through two more. I'm going a little long on time. Next segment, we're going to open it up, take calls, comments. Is this making sense to you? Do you see any of this in your own life? What does this bring to mind for yourself, okay? Thomas asks next, is the will of God always fulfilled? And now listen to this, because you're thinking, that seems to mean there's no free will, right? The will of God needs always be fulfilled. In proof of which we must consider that since an effect is conformed to the agent according to its form, the rule is the same with active causes as with formal causes. Okay, don't worry if you know that doesn't make sense, okay? The rule of forms is this, that although a thing may fall short of a particular form, it cannot fall short of the universal form. Since then, the will of God is the universal cause of all things. It is impossible that the divine will should not produce its effect. Hence, that which seems to depart from the divine will in one order returns into it in another order. So as does the sinner who by sin falls away from the divine will as much as lies in him, yet falls back into the order of that will when by justice he is punished. Okay, quick example. A mother calls her husband, a lady calls her husband at work and says, little Johnny is really misbehaving, and I think he might need to be disciplined. The father gets on the phone, talks to Johnny, and says, Johnny, if you do not start obeying your mother, I'm going to come home and I'm going to have to discipline you, okay? There's two scenarios that can happen here. The child can begin to obey, by which he is not punished, not disciplined, or he can disobey, and the father goes home and disciplines him. Okay, two different scenarios allowing for a contingency, right, where there's a decision, a free will there. In either scenario, is the father's will not being fulfilled? Because he created a contingency. He said, if this goes this way, I'm going to do this. And if this goes this way, I'm going to do this. And either way, my will will be fulfilled. Okay? There's other examples, but that's one. Okay, I think that makes sense. Okay, finally, then we're going to break. Does the will of God impose necessity on the things willed? The divine will imposes necessity on some things, but not all. Since then, the divine will is perfectly efficacious. It follows not only that things are done which God wills to be done, but also that they are done in the way that he wills. Now, God wills some things to be done necessarily, okay, birds and cats and dogs and ducks flying south and the sun rising and setting, and some contingently to the right ordering of things for the building up of the universe. Therefore, to some effects, he has attached necessary causes that cannot fail, but to others, defectible and contingent causes from which arise contingent effects. Hence it is not because the proximate causes are contingent that the effects willed by God happen contingently, but because God has prepared contingent causes for them, it being his will that they should happen contingently. All right. If you understood the example I gave about the father going home, it did not take away the free will of the child, but either way, the father's will was fulfilled. Regardless of what the father did, the father's going to get what he wants either way, okay? He may not want to discipline the child, but he's going to put that into it, okay? All right. Can you think of any other examples? Does that make sense? Have you ever thought of things that way as far as God's intellect being the cause of things, God's will, how it jives with free will? I'd love to hear from you. I hope Sissel has a few notes that she's written down. Sissel will ask a couple of questions, make a few comments as well. All right, we're going to take a break. Sorry I went long on this one, but we're going to come back and hear from you. Also, comment on social media as well. 877-757-9424. We'll be back.
We'll be back with more of Back to the Father after this. Please join the conversation by calling 877-757-9424 or join us on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter.
Your Odyssey begins at the University of Dallas, the premier Catholic liberal arts university in Texas. With campuses in Irving and Italy, UD's rigorous core curriculum sets it apart. An education rooted in the great works of Catholic and Western tradition. An education that ennobles and enables students in the pursuit of wisdom, truth, and virtue. Undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs are available. Start your college odyssey at the University of Dallas today. Go to udallas.edu to learn more.
Thank you for listening to the Guadalupe Radio Network and being part of the family. Families pray for each other. We would be honored if you would let us pray with you and for you. You don't even have to tell us your name. Just go to our website, grnonline.com, or call our prayer request line and leave us a message at 800-395-4008. That's 800-395-4008. We will be praying for you every day.
I don't know why I turned on my radio, because I've kept my radio off for years, because there's so much trash. And once I turned it on, I was absolutely hooked. I actually was gone from the Catholic Church for 35 years. I want to get to heaven. I don't know if I will. I worry about it. But I not only want to get to heaven at the moment of my death, I want to find as much heaven as possible here on earth. I love the shows with the Catholic apologist. I love the shows with the sort of day-to-day psychologist, Greg and Lisa Popchak. I love hearing not just of other people's problems who call in, but I love getting the Catholic take on how to deal with day-to-day reality. If your purpose in life is to find God, not just here, but after you die, then living out that purpose is going to color absolutely everything you do.
The Guadalupe Radio Network, radio for your soul. Welcome back to the Father. To join the conversation, call 877-757-9424. And please join us on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter.
All right, we are back. Thanks so much for joining us for this edition of Back to the Father here on the Guadalupe Radio Network. We're talking about our journey back to the Father through the study of Summa Theologia by St. Thomas Aquinas, Dave Palmer, Sissel, and Jonathan, and Diane. And Sissel kind of has this glazed look in her face. And nobody's called in yet. And
because they have glazed look in their face.
They're all like, what did he just say? What I try. Speaking
English?
I tried to distill it down as simple as possible. Maybe I didn't do that great of a job. But if you have a question, I dare you to call in and just say, you know what? Here's what I took out of this, or let me see if I can think of another example, or this is what I got out of that. Because ultimately, it's about coming to know God, who is ultimately incomprehensible, but we can know him, but mostly through his effects. And so we use our own life experience, and that helps us to get to better understand God a little bit, right? 877-757-9424, 877-757-9424. Last week we talked about lying, and Thomas saying lying, and then that was a little bit simpler and easier to understand, a little bit more cut and dry, but Anyway, Sissel, this is why you get the big bucks here at the Guadalupe Radio Network. You have to, listen to stuff like Thomistic philosophy. And
process it, answer it on a network-wide program. Yeah, no,
it's simple stuff there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really funny because when I saw what the topic was, because again, I don't know what's going to be about until right before we go on.
You're learning along with the audience.
Learning along with everyone else.
Right.
It is so funny because there are definitely different types of people in the world, and St. Thomas and I were two different types, all right? Because he's thinking about, does God think? or what does God think about? All these things I hadn't even really considered
Never
before.
even hit your radar.
It just, I guess I would say I'm definitely a person of simple faith, very childlike faith. It's just, I don't have to have it, it's very helpful. I'm discovering to have it explained out for me, but I always didn't always have to have that. However, is he the first person to write? Was he the first person to write on these kind of ideas of what is God?
Oh, no. In fact, one of the things St. Thomas Aquinas said was that he said, I never read anything that I didn't remember. And so he had a uber photographic memory where basically he read something and he remembered it, and he was, obviously brilliant. But no, if you look through the Summa, he's constantly quoting Aristotle, and he's quoting Augustine and Damascene and Jerome and Pseudo Dionysius the Areopagite, and that's my personal favorite. And Jewish and Muslim philosophers. So no, he didn't make all this stuff up, and these questions were not being asked for the first time in the Middle Ages. What he did was he took from so many different sources, and then he was able to put together a summary and the best of everybody. It's kind of like a greatest hits album,
Okay, gotcha.
And that's really what the beauty of the Summa Theologia was, is that everything that came before him was included. In the Middle Ages, a guy named Peter Lombard had written a book called The Sentences, and that was like the Summa of his age, and everybody, if they were doing Back to the Father back then, they'd be doing Peter Lombard. And then Thomas came and he perfected it and made it even better. And so now most people don't even know who Peter Lombard is, but he quotes him. He's called the commentator. But no, he didn't. He didn't invent all this stuff, or even the questions. They were being asked, for hundreds and hundreds of years before Aquinas.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that definitely I think stood out to me because, thinking about what does God think about, what does God do? It's not always something, again, that I consider, but two of these things I think are really important for us in our everyday life. Well, they all are, but what does God want? Because it's an interesting question to ask, and I guess I didn't really have an answer for it, but I like how you stated it. Obviously, St. Thomas said it in more words, but he said communicate his goodness to his creatures.
Yeah.
Which I think is really beautiful.
Yeah. There's that one article in the Summa where he says, I don't know if you talked about this in this show or not. Why are there so many creatures? Have we talked about that? Why there had to be 5,000 species of snakes, and
yes, please, why do
and it's so beautiful. In fact, I'm going to bring it up one of these weeks. Is that basically he said that God is simple, but creatures are manifold and diverse, and so God could not communicate himself through just one creature, and so in order to manifest his goodness, he had to. He didn't have to, but he decided to create millions and millions of species. And so what this has done for me is that when I look at a spider or a porcupine or a flamingo, and I can say there's something about God that he's communicating in this that he isn't it is in this. And so it's almost like a puzzle you're putting together. And it's not to say if you understand the possum and the dog and the aardvark, you're like, okay, I understand God because I understand those animals. But what it is it changes the way one will see life, because you're constantly searching for God. You're constantly looking for, hints. It's kind of like if you fell in love with a guy, right? And then you're walking through an airport and you see people, and that guy reminds me of my boyfriend. That guy has the same smile. That guy has the same, you know what I mean?
Oh, okay.
They're not him,
right?
But there's something about that guy's hair that reminds me of the one I love, okay? And so you're seeing reminders. And so what I have gotten out of this is if God is communicating his goodness through the created world, I like to wake up every day and say, well, what can I learn about God today? And of course, we can go to adoration. We go to Mass. That's the highest form of prayer. That's the best way to receive God, physically, tangibly through the sacrament of the Eucharist. But we can't be in Mass constantly, but we can be in the midst of God's beauty and creation constantly. And so that's why, there's all this highfalutin language and, contingencies and this and that. But when it all boils down, it's a different way of experiencing life and searching for God. So I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does. I mean, St. Thomas, I think he sounds really complicated, but his ideas are not. It's not as complicated. But I like that the fact that each creature is kind of like just teaching us more about God. And there's creatures we don't even know every animal species that there are.
Yeah.
So that's the idea that we're never going to know everything.
Maybe that one species that we haven't found yet.
He's the one who's going to tell us, unlock the key of God, obviously.
And we just haven't found him. And so.
Like a pokey little fish in the deep down in the darkest depths of the sea.
Yeah. And that's why, I say half jokingly that at zoos, they should have signs saying, don't forget to thank God for the goodness that you're experiencing. Why would we pay, $15 to go into a zoo and look at animals? Because they're fascinating. Because there's something about them. There's something good. There's something beautiful. There's something intriguing. But what it really is, when it all comes down to it, is that we're all attracted to the good, and the animals are beautiful, and they're interesting, and they're like God. They have a trace of God in them. They're not made in His image and likeness. That's only human beings and angels. But there is a certain likeness. All right, got a couple minutes left in this segment. If you want to call in, I dare you to call in and say, you know what? That made perfect sense to me. I just, I totally comprehended everything you just said in that last segment.
Or you could be truthful and call in and ask a question.
877-757-9424, 877-757-9424. Especially that whole idea of, God's will, His immutability, His providence. Even, and we're going to have a show about this sometime, does God predestine men? St. Thomas Aquinas says yes. Not in the same way as Calvin, but predestination.
That's going to get people really intrigued,
Yeah,
Dave.
that's and that'll be another show. But then how does that jive with free will? Does that example that I gave, and I could give other examples as well, about the disobedient child and God's will not being compromised, even though the child can choose one of two different directions. Anyways, all right. Wow. Anything else?
I appreciate that you gave the example about free will, because I think that's definitely an area that can be very confusing to people. Do you mind going over that one more time? The example of free will that you gave, that God's will must always be fulfilled. That's what St. Thomas says. Yes. Yeah. So, which then makes everyone go, but what if humans have free will? What if we choose to do something different? Can you just go over it one more time?
Yeah, I mean, the example I used was a lady calls her husband and says, little Johnny is being disobedient. You might need to come home and discipline him, assuming the father is the primary disciplinarian in the house. And so the father gets the little Johnny on the phone and says, Johnny, if you don't start obeying, I'm going to come home and I'm going to have to discipline you, okay? Whatever mode of discipline Johnny gets, right? And so Johnny has a decision to make. He either decides to be obedient, at which the father stays at work, doesn't come home, all is good, right? Or he continues to be disobedient, and the father comes home and disciplines him. Okay, the father established a contingency where either way, the father's will is going to be fulfilled, right? And so that allows the free will of the son to exercise itself. But regardless of what direction the son goes, the father's will is not compromised, okay? So he's still immutable in the sense that that's the privilege that God has given us. Unlike the other creatures in the world, they don't have choice, okay? That bird doesn't build a nest because it decided to that morning. It just does it, okay? This is the whole idea of teleology that we talked about in the first episode. And it has to do with providence. It has to do with the fifth proof of the existence of God, which is governance of the world. It all ties together with all these things. All right? So does that make a little bit more sense?
Oh, yeah. Right. Definitely. I'm basically a Thomist now.
And in the next segment, we're going to talk about why this matters, okay? I'm going to tie in a talk I went to last night, which was really fascinating. And this speaker did not ever refer to Aquinas, but I think deep down it has some implications to it, and also other things that can relate to our everyday life. If you want to call in, call us, 877-757-9424, 877-757-9424. And boy, this is really kind of stumping people because we're not even getting a lot of comments on social media. People are just like,
they're still sitting there, dazed and confused.
Can we go back to talking about lying? I think that was an easier topic. But
hey, listen, if I can ask questions, and maybe sometimes it takes a little humility to ask questions when you don't understand something. But please call in 877-757-9424.
All right, this isn't the easiest thing to digest, but I think it's really important. And so if you want to call us up in the next segment and talk about this, 877-757-9424. It's Back to the Father here on the Guadalupe Radio Network. We'll be back.
We'll be back with more of Back to the Father after this. Please join the conversation by calling 877-757-9424 or join us on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter.
The universe is filled with order from top to bottom. And it's a beautiful order. And not only is it beautiful, it's order that we can actually comprehend. And it's almost as if we have been made to be able to comprehend that order in the universe, to be able to contemplate it so that we can see maybe that purpose behind it.
Please visit Father Spitzer's website, magicenter.com, to watch this beautiful and important video about purpose and God's creation. That's magiscenter.com.
Instead of fighting the crowds, isn't it so much easier to hop online and do your shopping in the comfort of your own home? Did you know that you can help the Guadalupe Radio Network when you shop online? All you need to do is shop on Amazon Smile and 0.5% of your purchase goes to the GRN. Just go to amazonsmile.com and select La Promesa Foundation as your nonprofit of choice. La Promesa is the parent company of Guadalupe Radio. It's that simple to give a little extra help to the Guadalupe Radio Network.
In 2 weeks, we will be interrupting our regular programming schedule for a quarterly share-a-thon to keep your GRN station on the air. Why do we come to our listening family to seek financial gifts? The Guadalupe Radio Network spends approximately $4.5 million per year to operate all 37 stations in the network, or about $515 per hour. We are 100% listener-supported, completely dependent on the divine providence of God, working through the generosity of our GRN family of listeners. We are so thankful that you are part of the GRN family. I want to personally thank you for your continued prayerful and financial support since the year 2000, when the GRN first started in Catholic radio. This is Len Oswald, president of the Guadalupe Radio Network, with your GRN Family Minute. We are your Catholic radio. Radio for your soul.
Welcome back to the Father. To join the conversation, call 877-757-9424. And please join us on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter.
All right, we're back. This is Back to the Father, down to our last 13 minutes in this show. And if you want to join us, 877-757-9424, talking about God's intellect, His will. What does God want? What does God think, with air quotes? What does His intellect and His will have to do with us? And what does it mean to be made in the image and likeness of God? All these really light, kind of fluffy kind of things to talk about. All right, Jonathan, our wonderful intern, actually said, you know what, I got a question, I got a comment. So let's hear it, Jonathan.
Yeah, so I was thinking what you were talking about, free will. So they say that God will never permit an evil that He couldn't bring a greater good from.
Yeah.
So what if I called up my friend and was like, hey, let's go commit an evil that God can't bring a greater good from? Would He be like, would Him preventing me from doing that limit my free will, basically?
Would Him preventing you from committing an evil, because there's going to be some good that comes out of the evil? Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, people rarely speak that way. Like, you might say, let's go throw snowballs at cars, or which is kind of a cruddy thing to do, right? But you would never say, let's go do something evil. What do you say? So let's go do something fun. I don't think even something as heinous as like abortion, I don't think anybody, only a nut would say, I'm going to go do something really evil. In most cases, they have some perceived good that they're doing, which is a very big principle of Thomistic philosophy, is that people only pursue the good. Okay, so but can you give me an example, or like you guys are going to go get drunk or something, or I mean, what would be the evil that would be the example?
I don't know, just some horrible act for the sake of cooning,
You're just going to do something. I don't even. Yeah.
Don't get into it.
And so I mean, as weird as it sounds, there's some perceived good that you and your friends see in this. The thrill of doing it, or just I don't know, but God's going to bring some kind of good out of it. Yeah, but evil. The question of evil is actually one that perplexed Aquinas a lot until he came up, and he actually says that evil doesn't actually have being itself. It's the absence of good. So nothing is pure evil, it's lacking good. All right, so that's in your example, what you and your friend and whatever crazy things you guys are planning. I know this is all fictitious, of course. You never do anything evil, but whatever you're doing is just lacking in good, right? Which is amazingly positive to think that everything that we pursue is good. In fact, let me tell you the story about the talk. There's a gentleman by the name of Frank Ramirez, and he and his wife Jennifer have 5 children. Their 10-year-old daughter, 2 years ago in May, I think it was 2018, 2019, died of a very aggressive brain tumor. And from the time they found out to the time she passed away was just a few days, okay? Frank and his wife handled this amazingly because he had been so well formed in his faith that even in the midst of that suffering, Frank driving to the hospital that day said, God, if his daughter's name was Maggie, if Maggie dies or if Maggie lives, I'm never going to lose my faith in you. And then when she did eventually die, they did the Gloria in Excelsis Dei, because he knew through just the grace of God that there was something good. Of course, he believed as a 10-year-old pure child who had received confirmation on her deathbed and received her First Holy Communion, that she was with the Lord. And so he was able to see the good that was able to come out of this. That's an understanding of this whole principle of good coming out of evil, kind of like what Jonathan was talking about as well. So how does it apply to everyday life? Well, think of the thing that's annoying you right now. I was annoyed by the Equality Act passing in the House. I mean, I'm annoyed at COVID. I'm annoyed at lockdowns. I'm annoyed at a lot of things going on in our culture. I mean, you think about it. I'm
annoyed at crazy drivers on the road.
Yeah, I mean, so think about the fact that all things ultimately fall in to the will of God. Okay, so God is going to bring all things to perfection in the end. And I know it's good. It's sometimes you say, well, in the end, we win and that kind of stuff. But it's really true. And it puts everything into perspective that the evil is never going to prevail in the end, right? All right, last few minutes, 877-757-9424, 877-757-9424. But I'm glad you brought up the issue of evil, Jonathan, because that's like the number one reason people don't believe in God. They see all the evil. They see
How could God allow that?
Child abuse and rape and genocide, and you're like, how can a good God allow this? Well, Thomas addresses that directly in the Summa. He said it's always because some greater good is going to come out of it. Think of that horrible ice storm that had hit North Texas, almost all of Texas a few weeks ago, and the good that came out of it, neighbors helping neighbors, and people realizing their dependence upon other people as well. All right, I mentioned also about the number of species of creatures in the world. Do you want to take a wild guess about
the number of species in the world? The
the
world.
number of created, I'm not talking about like angels, but things that you could see, spiders and ants.
We're talking about every different type of spider.
Yeah.
Oh,
every species of spider. Yeah, and there's thousands of them.
Oh my! I don't know. I'm probably gonna end up going way over or way under. I'm trying to decide which one's worse.
Okay, all right.
I'm gonna say 23 billion species.
Billion.
0.5.
Well, that was billion with a B.
Yes.
Okay. Wow.
Jonathan, do you want to guess?
You want to guess?
We can have like a status. like who's gonna win?
Yeah. 23 billion. Wow. Okay.
I don't know why you're saying wow. If that's like way too much or way too little.
Yeah. No. That's all right. What do you think, Jonathan?
I'd say like 70 quintillion. I don't even know if that's a number. But.
Okay. No, as far as species, there's actually 8.7 million species. Okay, so you guys were, you guys.
I won, Jonathan.
You
I
guys
just want to
went
say.
a little bit high on that one, but
Well, I told you.
What about subspecies?
yeah, well, I don't know about that, but think about that. This is what blows me away: 8.7 million with an M species in the world, and all of us are subject to the providence of God. But as we learned, some are directed without the ability to have free will and make things that kind of go against God's at least immediate will. And the other ones are all just being kind of directed to their end without ever having the opportunity to walk away. Now, of course, it's riskier for us because we can risk going to hell. But in the end, we are the only species as human beings, Homo sapiens, that God has given the privilege of free will. And I find that to be an amazing thing.
It is.
Yeah, it certainly is. All right, so think about the things that frustrate you, the things that you wish were different, and also realize, as I mentioned a moment ago, that anything that somebody does that annoys you, they are doing for a perceived good. Okay, so it actually helps us to look at people more charitably.
Oh, sure.
I mean, think of some legislation or something going on in the world that really annoys you, and you say, you know what, they wouldn't be pursuing evil as evil. Okay, they're pursuing something that may be evil, maybe something really bad, but they're doing it under the guise of some kind of perceived good.
Right.
Yes. Okay.
Interesting. Yeah, well, I mean, even as simply as, when someone does cut you off in traffic, it probably sounds like I'm very bad, road rage, but,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, well, because they might be cutting you off and that's not a good thing. It's a dangerous thing, but they could be on their way to go, their wife is having a baby,
Yeah.
that's a good thing that they're trying to get their wife to the hospital,
It's funny you mention that, because in his talk last night, Frank Ramirez was saying that when he got the call from his wife saying Maggie's, doesn't look good, it's going downhill, he had to drive to the hospital, and he said, I was driving like crazy.
Yes.
Okay, so now when it's a good that he's trying to get to the hospital, right?
Right.
So now it happened this morning. I'm driving my daughters to school, and some guy goes roaring by, and I'm thinking, maybe, just maybe, there's an emergency.
Yes.
You just never know. And so it does kind of change the way we see people, because if you realize that people only do things for a perceived or a real good, wow, you can give people a lot of benefits of doubt, can't you?
You really can. And that's a good thing. I think we need a little bit more of those benefits of doubt these days.
Yeah, that's for sure. All right, last chance to get in. I'd be curious, just one person calling in and saying, does this make sense? Are you beginning to see any of the connections between the proofs for the existence of God, which I really won't put you on the spot, but I really think everybody should memorize. Okay, I tell my CCD students the same thing. I think everybody should memorize this, all right? All right, 877-757-9424. Have you memorized the 5 proofs for the existence of God? Have you memorized the 7 attributes of God? Okay, because you can really take these to prayer as well. I think there are certain things that we need to memorize. Okay, so proof through motion, proof through cause, necessity and possibility, the proof through degrees of perfection, and then governance of the world.
Yeah, that's the one I remembered right as you said.
But the perfection?
Governance of the world. That was the one I was like, oh. We did have a comment from Lucy on YouTube who said that thank you for the example you gave about the Father and God's will being fulfilled. She said, thanks for the great example. The will of God is always going to be fulfilled one way or another. So it definitely helped her. So
yeah, I'll give you another quick example. This may not be as good, but during the fall, I live in an area that has a lot of trees, right? And I got a 7-year-old son, Patrick, and he loves to go out and blow the leaves with me. Okay, so we go outside and we blow them into a big pile, and then we put them into a trash can, right? But when I'm blowing them, Patrick likes to redirect the blower. And so, like, if he sees a puddle of water, he wants to do that. Or if he sees a person, he wants to blow them. So I'm constantly, like, fighting kind of against him as we're doing it. But I want to do it because I love doing things with my son, right? But in the back of my mind, I know that in the end, I'm going to get a pile of leaves in this part of my yard, And I'm having a great time with him, even though he's using his free will and he's trying to redirect and he's trying to blow this and blow that and blow, that earthworm he sees. And I laugh sometimes because I say, you know what? This may take me a little bit longer, but in the end, I know I'm going to have a pile of leaves, regardless of how he tries to detract me from my end, right? So
that's so fun. That does make you think about God, just watching us just go in circles over and over. And he's like, oh, they're going to get there. They're getting there.
In the end, he's going to direct things in accordance with his will. So I'm glad that Lucy, it made sense to her. And if you're listening there and you're thinking, this stuff is kind of hard to get to take. Yes, it is, because God is, in his simplicity, hard for us to understand. Okay, I know that sounds ironic, but the more you stick with it and the more you learn and the more you start tying all this stuff together, I promise you it's going to have an impact on the way you see the world and the way you live intently and deliberately for your final end. And that's why we call it Back to the Father. Okay, so now Sissel's going to go home and just take a bath and get a glass of wine and say, woo!
Yes, and just sit there going, what just happened?
What just happened? All right, so thanks, Sissel. You're a good sport. And somebody told me today, they said, gosh, I can't believe Sissel picks up on this stuff so well,
Well, whoever you are, you angel.
It was Carla. All right, also, Jonathan, thank you so much. Diane Xavier, do a great job behind the scenes. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. We'll have a less confusing Back to the Father next Friday, same time. God bless you. Have a great weekend.
Thanks for joining us for Back to the Father. And don't forget, the glory of God is the human person fully alive. If you have comments about the show, email Dave Palmer at grnonline.com.
At Mary Immaculate